Today we are going to offer a critique on the representations of Indigenous peoples from our visit to the Royal Saskatchewan Museum. We decided that we would start our journey with the section of the museum, We Are Treaty People, and continue on that way. Normally you would start your journey through the dinosaur era first and then continue on. It was interesting to start our journey where we did, and it really opened our eyes to discover some new perspectives we might not have had we entered in another direction.
The Royal Saskatchewan Museum has included a policy on their website that addresses the concerns of the Indigenous peoples about the access to and the care, use, and repatriation of sacred and culturally sensitive objects originating with their cultures and the museum collections.
It has been a couple years since visiting the museum here in Regina, and what we did notice was that we became a lot more observant of things throughout our time walking around in order to really decolonize ourselves from our white settler backgrounds. It allowed us to be open to new experiences as well as relate to the new learnings we are now experiencing through our treaty walk.
At the beginning of the museum, there's a sign that is one of the newer additions to the First Nations exhibit. It's titled The First Nations. This expresses that there are 5 different nations that Saskatchewan is home to, and goes on to say that each has a unique history and a unique system of beliefs, customs, and traditions. However, as you explore the exhibit and look at the clothes, tools, and art in the museum, we notice it never specified which Indigenous peoples they belong to. It did not express any specific nations such as Cree, Nakota, or Dakota, and so it placed all the Indigenous peoples in the same category under one broad blanket term. It does not show or express the differences or compare the similarities in the different nations, but instead lumps all Indigenous nations and cultures together. Because it mentions at the beginning that each nation is unique, shouldn't it express the uniqueness of each throughout the museum?
Things did look different, and perhaps it was that we were seeing things from a different lens and looking for things that would be marked as culturally appropriate based on Chapter 9 of Vowell's book. One thing that particularly stood out is the importance of not displaying things such as eagle feathers and what they mean to the culture who had earned them. Eagle feathers were never meant to be displayed as part of the fact that they were not just given to anyone. The person who earned the eagle feathers had done something extraordinary in order to receive one, and therefore should not be reproduced in any way. This made us think of how we often represent things without truly understanding what they mean to the culture or person being represented, and it shouldn't be up to us to decide those things. It allowed us to see things from a different lens than we were used to. Perhaps people are representing stories that are not even theirs to tell.
While walking through, motion sometimes triggered an audio recording to explain a bit more about the display, and we noticed that some would mention that it was going to be read in English and in an Indigenous language such as Cree. However, the English explanation always came first, and most people did not stick around to hear the Cree version. Perhaps it would be better suited if they had a board or list of Cree words, so while you listen, you can see if you can match the words you're hearing to the words on the list. It may help visitors to make the connections with the language. The museum walks you through a bit of a timeline. It starts with a large sign that shares the story of recreating Turtle Island, followed by a sign that states the arrival of people. As you explore, you can see the Indigenous peoples building teepees. You can see the beaded clothes that they made, and you can even see a room with miniature representations of what a day in every season may look like. But as you wander further into the museum and closer to the end, we see in trades, treaties, and today, the families are moving towards a lifestyle with wooden houses and snowmobiles. We see trades that brought them tools and clothes by the settlers, but what we don't see is the process of how they got to that point. We don't see the taking over of land or the battles that broke out between the settlers and the nations. There's nothing about residential schools or the 60s scoop, which we felt was important as Regina itself had a residential school, and so it's part of our own local history. A very small scroll on the wall tells about the diseases that killed 9 out of 10 people and the buffalo that faced extinction, all in only 2 sentences. It talks about how the Indigenous peoples wanted answers from the Crown about what to do and how they will ensure their people's survival, but it does not say anything else. It leaves the information with a couple sentences of Indigenous people's concerns, but it does not express outcomes, resolutions, or lack thereof.
As future educators, we would encourage our class to unlearn certain white colonial perspectives and possibly offer these stories as part of our new understandings. It is important to remind our students to think about the pieces of the story that could be missing and why they should be included in our learning.
Sometimes when we visit a museum, we're exposed to certain aspects of culture that may not always be the whole representation of that culture or history. It is important to continue the conversation of Indigenous peoples' culture and history and not just end it with a trip to the museum, but rather to continue to acknowledge treaty education through our teaching practices every day.